The first season of Wheel of Time came out a while ago at this point by the time I'm making this video, and it's safe to say that it's pretty bad, all things considered. So there's been a lot of criticism. However, there's one particular criticism that just...
Stop!
No! Is it surprising? Not really. Like, outlets have been saying this for every new fantasy show since Game of Thrones came out. So I'm thinking there's no way that actual viewers and fans actually believe this stuff, right?
It's my opinion that the production team involved with Amazon's Wheel of Time simply wanted to use the author's work as an avenue to make their own version of Game of Thrones.
Sure, the showrunners made the series more mature. They aged up the characters, and that naturally comes with, some sex and gory scenes. And this isn't necessarily contradicting the source material. If you've read the books, you would know this. Because those elements are in the series, it's just that the way Robert Jordan writes, he doesn't really emphasize those things. And again, if you've read the books, you would know what I'm talking about. But let's entertain the comparison, shall we? Let's see, in season 1 of Game of Thrones alone, in the very first scene, this is the tone setter. Let's not forget, the whole Dany getting married to Khal Drogo, like this is basically straight up just sex slavery. And it just gets worse. Like Ned's whole entire crew gets murked in King's Landing. Then he gets beheaded. And it's just constant nudity and graphic violence. Like, do I need to say more? And honestly, this is just season 1 alone. We haven't gotten to the later seasons with Ramsay and torturing Theon and Sansa and just... Now compare that, right, to this scene with Rand and Egwene. Like, we don't see them do anything. We don't see any full frontal nudity. Everything is consensual and it's pretty tame. So I just don't...
One major change that I felt demonstrated this was the injection of mature content into the series. In the books, the main characters act far more innocent when it comes to romantic intimacy. However, the TV series dives headlong into depictions of the sexual lives of these same characters.
Are you sure about that?
It's not comparable no matter which way you look at it. The violence in Wheel of Time overall also doesn't hold a torch to Game of Thrones. The only thing that comes close is this. My question though would be, how do you change this? How do you make this less graphic? If you go the book route, the attack would mostly happen off screen. And I don't have to tell you that is just awful filmmaking. So really, your only option is to tone down the blood, but you run the risk of losing tension in the scene because these monsters are supposed to be like threatening and violent. You have to feel that, or else they just become cannon fodder a little too quickly, even though that's kind of the purpose that they serve anyways. So in other words, it's not as simple as just sticking to the books. Like, what a shocker. That's what adaptations are, but And honestly, the same can be said for the parent scene. Like, I can see why someone might think this is over the top. But it's bad enough that the show leaned into the fridging trope. But if this scene isn't horrifying and bloody, then it's a failure on 2 fronts. And the reason why is that Perrin's entire arc in this first season is tied to this specific scene. If we don't feel that, the visceralness of it, then it just makes the season even worse. And case in point, if they made the change that Sanderson suggested, substituting Perrin's wife with Master Luhan, then the scene would have worked a lot better. It still would probably be just as gory, but it gets rid of at least the fridging aspect of it. There's more magic in the first episode of Wheel of Time than in all 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. That's only partially a joke. Visually, Wheel of Time, although it's just so uninspiring in how generic it looks, it's at least brighter and there's a lot more landscape shots. So in that way, it's actually more similar to like Lord of the Rings. Game of Thrones is just more gritty. The visuals, there's a lot of grays and muted colors. This just intensifies as the seasons progresses. So much so that by the last battle, like it's so dark you can't even see anything. The plot of Season 1 also does not compare to Game of Thrones Season 1 in the slightest. Yes, both are epic fantasy, but it's like comparing a tomato to an apple. Season 1 of Wheel of Time really focuses on the identity of the Chosen One, confronting the Dark One at the Eye of the World, and introducing all these complex magic systems and world-building elements. Thrones Season 1 is primarily political intrigue with a dash of tree magic and dragons sprinkled in at the end. Thematically, both series also serve very different purposes, and I'm specifically talking about the book series now. A Song of Ice and Fire is really about combining years of epic fantasy tropes, deconstructing them, and then injecting them into a gritty medieval setting. Political intrigue often takes center stage, while the fantasy elements are kind of shrouded more in mystery. Wheel of Time is the exact opposite. It's not even medieval. Robert Jordan really embraces a lot of epic fantasy tropes, and he creates an entire world where he explores them in, at times, painstaking detail. Wheel of Time is really about telling the most realistic Chosen One narrative. And it's reminiscent of every epic fantasy out there, but just a little bit different. And I don't know if that makes sense, but I think this is a perfect way of putting it.
Every single epic fantasy takes place in the same world. Each one is just a different turning of the Wheel of Time. Each Chosen One is just Rand al'Thor in a past or future life. Every wise mentor is Gandalf a few million years after Gandalf died. Every legendary warrior is just Mike Tyson without the lisp.
If you're going to be that person that stands on faithfulness to the source material as like the top criteria for judging adaptations, you can at least like read the series and understand what you're reading. Just saying. And if you're still not convinced, how about this? Let's take an actual Game of Thrones inspired show. Do that comparison. All that said, there's a reason why this show has mixed reviews. I think the show has bigger issues than its unfaithfulness to Robert Jordan's books. And this is just one example. So the whole love triangle thing with Perrin, Egwene, and Rand was just bad. And why is it bad? Because it comes as a surprise and it just ends up feeling like cheap drama. So what makes it bad is that it doesn't effectively communicate the love triangle for it to be believable. And this is just called bad writing. Let's just call it what it is. And that is where I think Nerd Cookies kind of misses the entire point.
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
The point is, if you don't like this show, that is perfectly fine. Just like
You're just wrong. Shut the fuck up and be wrong. It's okay to be wrong.
let the Game of Thrones comparison die. It is one of the most nonsensical arguments people trot out to criticize any new fantasy series, especially when the comparison makes zero sense. So that's all I had to say.